Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live Q&A event. I'm Laura Koval, owner of Able Veg. We got some really good questions this week, so I'm really looking forward to sharing them with you all. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in at any time and let us know. This is Dwight. He's my co-host today so that he doesn't chew anything else up. We've never had a puppy before. We've only adopted older dogs, and so we were finding out the hard way that his little puppy teeth get into just about everything. So one note to get us started today. Coming up this Wednesday, that's the 15th of September, we're going to be doing our vegetable gardening class, our fall vegetable gardening class for free. If you want to tune in over your lunch break, it's going to be at noon Central Time. It's a really fun class. If you've ever been interested in fall vegetable gardening, definitely be there. It will be posted onto our website as well for your viewing pleasure later if you can't make it to the live event, and that's just fine. So with that, if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to type them in and let us know. But otherwise, we're going to get started. Let me pull up our list of questions this week. All right, the first question I got, and I got this from a couple people actually this week, was, once okra gets too large to eat, is there anything you can do with them since they aren't good anymore? And so, yes, Kristen, you are correct. Once okra gets to be a large enough size, it depends on the variety a little bit, but usually it's a few inches long. Once it gets too big, they become really woody, and so they're really not good to chew. Their flavor quality goes down. So there's a couple things that you can still do with them. You can definitely save them for seeds next year. Okra seeds are one thing I never really buy anymore because it's just so darn easy. You can just even let the frost kill them off in the fall, and you'll still have this pod of okra seeds. It'll dry out on the plant, and then you can just harvest them for the next year. So definitely seed saving. It'll save you a few dollars in the coming years. There are some recipes out there, I've not tried them, but where you can actually use the okra seeds as opposed to the whole pod. So if you wanted to add those to a soup or a stew or something, of course, those are still edible. Apparently, I've not tried it, but apparently they still have the same flavor of okra. So at least you're getting something from the plant. You can dry them too. I saw them somewhere dried and preserved as a decor item, like that you would put in a container or something. So, you know, if that's your style, you can definitely save them from your garden in that way, and that's totally fine to do too. But yes, unfortunately, once okra pods get a certain size, they really aren't edible anymore, except for possibly by my puppy, who basically is eating everything right now. So hope that helps a little bit. You know, the good news about plants like that is that really, when it is so darn easy to save the seeds, you save money every year, and you can keep the ones that you like and not keep the varieties that you don't. And so you always have the ones that you want. All right, next question. How do I know when to pick my watermelons? This is another question I get a lot this time of year. I am in Tulsa, I'm in Zone 7B. Right now, a lot of people are having watermelon that's just coming close to being ripe. If you got your things down in the ground a little bit sooner, yours probably will as well. So, interesting fact about watermelon does not ripen once it's picked from the vine. Most fruits do. If we've ever seen a cantaloupe that you bought in the store and it has some of the white veins on it, but it's mostly green and then gradually turns that kind of orangey yellow golden color that lets you know that that cantaloupe is ready to be eaten. A watermelon will not do that. And if you pick it too soon, what'll happen is you'll cut it open. You'll usually see that it's a little lighter in color, or if it's really early, that it's very white in color with maybe just some little pink splotches in it. That means you pulled it too early, and that's a huge disappointment because given that it's something that you wait for a long time, that you nurture through the season, that can be really difficult. So once you have your watermelon and it's looking like it's close to ripe, it's looking like it's about the size that you anticipate it to be, what you want to do is start checking at the stem end of the fruit. So the fruit, it's hard to tell from the outside because they kind of grow and mature into normally a green like you would see in a store-bought watermelon. Depending on the variety, that'll vary a little bit. But you can't really tell by the color. But if you pick it up, it should feel heavy for its size. You should almost feel like it's kind of sloshing around in there. It has a lot of liquid in it. But check out your stem, because once that stem starts to turn brown and die off, that's the plant's way of saying this fruit is done. I'm sending its seeds out in the world to germinate other places. I've done my job here. So keep checking at that stem end. You want to leave it as long as possible. Make sure that stem is brown. If it's just starting to turn brown, heck, I would say even leave it a couple more days, because the likelihood of it over ripening isn't that great, because you're going to be out there wanting to eat it. But let that bad boy ripen, because it's really, really disappointing when you wait for this huge fruit and you open it up and you really can't do anything with it. So go ahead and leave it, wait, and then take pictures of it. It's always so fun. Melons are a really fun thing to harvest. They're really exciting. Okay, next question. I've seen some of your Instagram photos. You have chickens. Do you let your chickens free range in your garden? So yes, I have 7 chickens. We live right in the city limits of Tulsa, so we are limited as to how many chickens we can have. And we actually do have a rooster too, which is legal here, which I also did clear with my neighbors before we brought him in. And we brought him in to protect the hens because hawks were getting at him. So I generally do not let my chickens free range in my garden. You theoretically can, but what tends to happen is they tend to nest and dig in there, so they'll start scratching and looking for insects, and they'll tear up your plants, especially if they're small. Certain things like cruciferous vegetables, like my cabbage plants that I have planted, just went in maybe a week ago right now, they will actually eat those plants. So you want to keep them out unless they're closely supervised. That being said, I will every once in a while bring 1 or 2 of them in with me, especially if I've pulled everything up in a bed, and I will let them go to town nesting in that bed. They're kind of a natural tiller, if you will. You'll let them scratch around in there, they'll dig, they'll eat some of the grubs that are buried in there, so they can actually be really good at insect protection, or prevention, I should say. So let them in there, let them till in your soil amendments. I'll bring them in this fall. With the beds I'm not doing a winter garden in, I'll let those ladies have at it. I'll put my compost in there and start to stir it in, and then they'll do a lot of the work for me. Same thing if I put a cover crop in a bunch of my beds. Once that cover crop is about spent, I'll kind of pull it up, set it on the top, and I'll let those ladies till it in. So they can be very effective, but definitely you want to supervise them because they can uproot and really cause a lot of damage to plants. But they're fun. Everyone should have backyard chickens. They're a great contribution to your garden. Having their eggs is awesome. All right, next question. I had poor results for my squash this year, and I think it might be because I don't have many pollinators. Our subdivision is new and there are very few people with flowers or gardens. Can I do anything to attract more pollinators? So this is a great question, and yes, absolutely. If you live in a newer subdivision, you're not going to have as many pollinators yet because not many people have planted things that pollinators like to stop at. So I always plant some flowers in and amongst my vegetable garden. Those are going to help really bring your pollinators through. Some of the things that I plant in there, I love nasturtium. They attract some pollinators. They're edible as well, so that's really nice. I always have sunflowers in there. Sometimes I do zinnias. Any of those flowers that pollinators like, you can just tuck those in the corner of a bed, and that's going to help them to work their way through your garden. There's also certain plants like Loofah plants, for example, and we have another question about them coming up, but they attract pollinators like crazy because they get these beautiful big yellow flowers. So if you have things in your garden that will attract them, that'll really help. You can also, if you're just starting to landscape, plant some pollinator plants. There's lots of lists that are very zone specific, so you don't have to do any guesswork, that'll tell you what they like. Put some pots out for them. There's also the option of putting out a water source, which I found seems to really help. Pollinators, bees, and butterflies aren't going to go for a dip in a deep, water intended for birds. But you could put some stones in there that they can sit upon and kind of sip at the water that way, so providing a water source can help. And there's also a great website. I have a pollinator garden in my front yard, and it's certified through monarchwatch.org. If you like pollinators, if you'd like to have more bees and butterflies and beneficial wasps and all those critters coming in, check them out. It's a great website. They're really trying to help promote kind of urban gardening that attracts and helps pollinators, specifically monarchs, to your yard, but they have lots of good information on there, lots of good, reliable info online. So look for, I'll always say this, type in pollinator plants for whatever state or zone you're in, .edu, then you're going to get university information that's going to be fact-based instead of kind of a guesswork. But putting those in your garden is going to be a huge help. And also, as your subdivision grows and changes, obviously lots of your neighbors are going to start putting in more plants. You'll naturally see more pollinators coming through. So hopefully those help. I love seeing butterflies and hummingbirds and all kinds of things this time of year. So it really is worth it and worth your time investment to be sure you're getting all of those visitors to your garden. The one last thing I will say is if you're still having problems, you can hand pollinate your squash. You can look online for how to tell the difference between a male and a female. The female is basically going to have what looks like little tiny underdeveloped fruit right underneath the flower, and you can hand pollinate them, and that will help as well. You can do that, just gently swirl a paintbrush of some kind or a makeup brush around the male flower, then on the female, or you can just pluck the male flower and put their stamens together and pollinate that way. So that's definitely an option if you're wanting to get more squash. So hopefully between those two things, you'll have lots of other pollinator visitors the rest of this year and into next. All right, next question. Here's our loofah question this week. My loofah plant is growing like crazy. How in the world do I know when to harvest them? Awesome. So I almost cut one of mine off and brought it in, but the more impressive ones are the ones I want to leave on the vine. So we have 2 loofah plants this year in 2 different beds. They're vining like crazy. They crawl and climb anything. They have these big, beautiful blossoms. If you live in zone 7 or warmer, it's an excellent, excellent option either for a flower garden or a vegetable garden. They are edible when they're little, so when you have the small, kind of 7-inch and under, you can eat them. They kind of taste like a summer squash, but the others get a couple feet long. There'd be these huge, massive gourds. Typically what you want to do is keep just a few of them on the vine because that's going to let them go to full maturity. One of the reasons they need a warmer climate that's zone 7 or warmer is because they need a lot of time. They don't take off until it starts getting hot, and that's when they're going to start developing fruit. So they need a long season to do so. So by pulling some of them off and leaving just a few of them to really, really mature, they're going to be the most mature possible before that first frost hits. What you'll do, if they're brown, which is ideally what you want them to have been on the vine so long that they're brown and kind of crunchy feeling on the outside, then you'll harvest them off that way. Oftentimes mine don't quite get there. They'll be starting to brown, but you can pull them from the vine then, clip them off gently, leave them to dry outside for a couple days, and then you peel them. And they're kind of hard to peel, but kind of fun. They have a real leathery feel. There is a video on our Facebook page that'll show you exactly how to process your loofahs, but really the best answer is keep a few of them on there, get them nice and mature, and then you'll pull them before or right after the first frost. So they're pretty easy and pretty fun. So check out that video, and of course let us know if you have any more questions after that. All right, next question here. What do you do with your extra produce? Do you donate it or save it? And what are some ways to save extras? I'm overwhelmed with cherry tomatoes right now. Okay, great. Awesome, awesome problem to have when we have too much good stuff coming out of our gardens. So the answer is yes, we have currently, I think, 18 raised beds. We've got a lot of space. So yes, I absolutely have donated our produce when we have a plethora of extra radishes in the spring or peas or something that I know my family can't use. We definitely will pass it on. I mentioned my rooster earlier in this episode, and I thank my neighbors for allowing me to keep Robert, my rooster, by providing them with some extra produce too. So it's a nice thing to give away. People rarely turn it down. But other than that, I do canning. So a lot of right now, my next plan is pickled jalapenos will be happening this week. So if you're doing some kind of canning or pickling, that's a really, really good way to save your produce, especially cucumbers, which seem to come in all at the same time. You just have so many cucumbers, you don't know what to do. Excellent for canning. I also freeze a lot of my stuff. My cherry tomatoes, I'll just wash them off well, freeze them on a cookie sheet, and then put them in a freezer bag. And I'll keep those and use those in sauces and stews and other things over the winter. I love freezing things because it's a nice way to make a quick meal. Green beans are another thing. My Chinese red noodle beans, I will blanch and freeze a lot of those. If you have something very specific, like you said, your cherry tomatoes, and you really want to find different ways to preserve them, you can look around for recipes. There's some really good resources out there. But yeah, and so canning and freezing are two really good options. If you have herbs, you can also do a lot of other things. You can do oil infusions. You can dry those out. So you can save and preserve herbs in a slightly different way. You just want to be sure you're getting the drying process going when they're kind of at their peak. So those are kind of the basic ways to save extras. Some people will just make huge batches of certain soups or stews. I have one client who has lots and lots of okra, so she'll make lots and lots of different okra based stews and then freeze those as well. So you have them all winter long. And that's kind of my goal, is I like to have enough, so we'll definitely this year be eating from our tomatoes and green beans until we are harvesting for the next year. So freezing is, I think, the easiest way to do that. Canning is a great choice. But yes, definitely save them. You can save seeds from some of them. And it's an awesome problem to have. It's one of the best problems when you're a gardener, is when you have so many tomatoes you don't know what to do with them. So congratulations on that. All right, next question here. I've heard you should dig eggshells into the soil around tomato plants to help with blossom end rot. Is it better to grind them up first? Okay, so I'm going to give a very unpopular answer to this question because this is really common. So blossom end rot is when you can get this on tomatoes, you can get this on squash, and you'll have a perfectly normal looking fruit. In tomatoes, it'll present as the bottom of the fruit shrivels up, gets kind of flat, very brown and kind of leathery looking. It's called blossom end rot. So when you have blossom end rot, yes, it is true that it is a calcium deficiency to that fruit. Eggshells, yes, can add calcium to your garden over time, but there's a few reasons that putting eggshells in your garden is not an effective solution. So first of all, the reason blossom end rot occurs is not usually due to a lack of calcium in your soil. It's usually due to having heavy rainfall following a period of drought. So if we have a long time where you're getting no rain and then all of a sudden you get some downpours of rain, really common where I live now. It was also common when I lived in Colorado because it was usually so dry, and then we just get this random downpour that can cause your fruit to crack and cause blossom end rot. So what's actually happening is the vascular system of your plants and their stems are way better at moving nutrients around than the fruit. They have a much stronger circulatory system, if you will. So if you think of us as humans, we have a circulatory system as well. Plants do the same thing, and they're moving all of these nutrients back and forth to different plant parts, including the fruit. However, the fruit is made to be kind of a pouch for seeds to move on. It's their procreation tool. The fruit is not going to have the same capabilities as the stems and roots of your plants to move those nutrients around. When we get a huge influx of rain, what's happening is it kind of stunts the circulatory system, and your fruit, since it's not as strong, isn't able to move calcium as efficiently. That's what causes blossom end rot. So the problem here with the eggshell solution is, one, you very likely don't have a calcium deficiency. Two, even if you have a calcium deficiency, those eggshells are going to take a while to work their way into your soil and be broken down in a way that those plants need. So it's not going to hurt anything, but it's definitely not an immediate fix. And the third problem is, even if you have an overload of calcium in your soil, it's not going to necessarily prevent blossom end rot, simply because it's a circulation issue. So it's not a bad thing. If you put them in there, it's not going to hurt a thing. You can leave them there. It is true, if you have something that you're using as a compost or soil amendment, that yes, if you break it down as much as possible, that's going to give your soil ecosystem more time, or it's going to take them less time, I should say, to move all of those nutrients around in your soil. So yes, in general, grinding them up would be better. But like I said, blossom end rot, it's a myth that the eggshells are going to help. So that's one of those things that's kind of one of the old wives' tales things that you see a lot on the internet. So hopefully that helps. Best way to prevent blossom end rot is to try to consistently water your plants. Make sure they're not going from drought conditions all of a sudden to getting this huge influx of moisture. But sometimes that just happens and tomatoes crack. And depending on your climate, it can be really challenging, especially when you're a farmer and you have a nice high tunnel or a greenhouse. You really have a lot of control over how much water your plants get. But we as home gardeners don't as much. So just try to mitigate the best way you can. Okay. Next one here. My garden never seems to produce as early as other gardens. Could it be my soil? So this is a really interesting question. So Theoretically, sure. It could, if your garden is taking longer to produce, then yes, it could be a soil deficiency. However, if it was some kind of a deficiency of a nutrient in your soil, you wouldn't get good production ever. It's not as if all of a sudden your plant would catch up. Your plants would always be smaller. They wouldn't be producing very wholeheartedly. So if you have plants that are not maturing as fast as others, the likelihood that it's a soil issue is pretty unlikely, because you would see a lot of other different things happening to your garden. Your plants would start looking yellow, they'd start getting shrivelly, they wouldn't grow. So there would be a lot of other symptoms. Yes, if you have proper nutrition in your soil, though, it is going to help the process a little bit. But I will say here, I know we all get really anxious when we put our stuff in the ground and we want to, be eating out of our gardens right away. Totally understand that. I totally empathize with that. However, that said, my garden is never the first to produce, ever, because I garden year round. So in the spring, I have to wait for my winter garden to be done before I can implement my spring planting. So I'm never the first one to get things in the ground. Doesn't really bother me because I know I'm going to get that production. I plan the best as possible. And I'll also say here too, whenever I get these questions, and a lot of time people will be looking at Facebook pictures, Instagram pictures, in gardening forums, and they'll see these people who are getting these great results. Just don't let that guy bother you. Nobody likes that guy, right? There are some people that are just out there to prove themselves that they are the best gardener in the world, and they're so early, and they have this 10 by 10 square foot garden, and they got, 1,000 pounds of tomatoes this year. Like, there are those people out there who are just obnoxious. So ignore some of those. And then also, there are some people out there who are, say, really, really good at growing tomatoes. You have people that are home gardeners that have a high tunnel where they keep their tomatoes, where they're getting them in early. People who have worked on farms or operated a farm. People who all they grow is tomatoes. And so those people are definitely going to be really tuned in to getting those fruits to ripen a little bit sooner. That's just part of it. The average home gardener who grows a variety of different things is going to see some things mature faster and slower. Yes, it could have a little bit to do with soil nutrition, but if you've had a soil test and everything is looking pretty good, it's probably just timing. And different regions, of course, are going to vary wildly. I follow some companies that are Australian, and their seasons are reversed from us. So what they're getting in their gardens is the polar opposite of what I'm getting in mine. So keep all of that stuff in context. If you're getting good production from your garden, you're getting good production from your garden. It doesn't have to be fast. You can extend your season with frost protection if you need to. And there's other ways to mitigate it. So don't always feel like faster is better. That shouldn't be the standard that you hold your garden to, because it's simply not the case. Okay, next question. One of my pepper plants suddenly looks wilted and like it isn't getting enough water, but I'm watering it each day. What's going on? This is a great question. It's a wilt disease. This is a disease. And this will actually, I put this in, I'll lump it into the next question I had too, because they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. Wilt diseases affect everything in the nightshade family, so tomatoes and peppers are on that list. Potatoes can be affected as well. And it's a really self-descriptive disease because you'll go out there and you're absolutely right. Your plant will look like you haven't watered it in days. So the leaves will be limp. It's a problem. It's a disease that affects the plant circulation. We were talking about with the blossom end rot just here a couple minutes ago. So you're gonna probably just lose the plant. If there's some fruit on there, you can leave it for a little while and wait for it to ripen. But if it's small, it's not gonna get any bigger. Get the plant out of there. There's no real cure for it. It's in your soil. You can plant wilt resistant varieties next year. That will definitely help. And definitely focus on crop rotation. Don't put more peppers and tomatoes in that spot next year, or you're going to continue getting that same wilt disease. So yeah, I'm sorry. That's always such a bummer answer because there's nothing that you can really do. For a lot of us, it's too late in the season. If you're far south, you can definitely still plant some pepper plants. For most regions right now, it's just kind of a loss at this point. So unfortunately, that's not great news, but go ahead and remove that plant, crop rotation, and then be on the lookout next year. And if it becomes a problem, get those resistant varieties. And it should say on the label. So do a little bit of research and you'll have more success next year. All right, so next question. This one kind of rolls into what we were just talking about with the wilt disease. How do I know if my plant has a disease or if something else is going on? So this is a great question. I think people tend to always assume it's a disease, that if there's a problem with your plant, it has some kind of a disease. Any damage, it's a disease. But most of the time, it's going to be environmental damage or insect damage. There's a couple ways to determine this. If you have plants of more than one type that are all seemingly affected, probably an environmental issue. This could be anything from a soil issue to the way you're watering, to somebody next door sprayed a pesticide or an herbicide that got on your plants and caused damage. But if it's more than one plant and more than one family, it's almost definitely going to be something environmental. So you need to start kind of going through that and seeing, okay, what could be happening that all of my plants are looking a certain way. And if there's something specific and your plants are really looking like something specific, we can definitely help you troubleshoot that. The next most likely thing is going to be some kind of a pest. So the way you can tell pest damage is by thinking in terms of their insect mouth parts, and that is the technical term because all insects affect plants differently if they're causing some kind of damage. There's different ways that they can cause damage to your plant. The first one, and the one that we're all most familiar with, is if you see parts of your plant nibbled off, it's an insect eating your plant. I think that's pretty well known. If it looks chewed off, it could be a caterpillar, it could be a grasshopper, but it's something eating your plant. But in those cases, you'll see there will be holes in a leaf, the leaf will be eaten down, and that can happen really quickly depending on the pest. There are also insects that have sucking mouth parts, and that means they inject them into your plant and suck out the juices from the plant cells. This can cause some wilting, you'll see some browning, sometimes some little tiny holes. And the other type are scraping insects where they're scraping the cells off of the leaf. So usually if you have insect damage, it might be kind of on the whole plant, but it's not going to be totally consistent because those critters will have started in one spot, and hopefully by now anyone watching this has learned you need to be out in your garden every other day at least checking for these problems. But probably if you're seeing actual damage and it's kind of splotchy on the plant, more than likely it's insect damage. If it's a disease, like the wilt disease that we were just talking about with the pepper plant, a disease is going to be an internal process going awry for your plant, which means maybe it starts affecting one branch, one leaf, but then you'll see it kind of gradually spread throughout the plant. And you'll see spots, you'll see sometimes yellow dots with some brown around the edge, but if it starts in a small space and then slowly starts to spread into other branches and affect other leaves, that's when you want to look into a disease. And diseases can be rough. There's not too much we can do for a lot of them. But the good news is most of it is environmental. Most of it is something that you can fix all on your own. So hopefully that helps. Definitely, if you have specific damage, we'd love to see a picture and we can help you diagnose that and put it on next week's talk. So with that, thank you all who were here to view this. I know most people, this is kind of a midday on a Monday thing, so we get a lot of views afterwards, but always send us your questions. We love to have them. We love to help. And so send them along. And again, this Wednesday at noon Central Time, we will be doing our free fall gardening class. I'll be doing that right here on Facebook Live. So please attend that, or please watch it if you're at all interested in fall gardening. It's a fun time of year. So with that, thank you all. Keep up with the good questions. We love talking about them, and we will see you next week.